This is going to be politically radioactive. Essentially, what we have here is a redistribution where you are taking from the poor and to a certain extent the very rich, but I don't necessarily expect anybody to talk about that. So people that are above that income threshold, or people that are at or below that income threshold that didn't go to college, right? So you're taking from the working class and to a certain extent the upper class, but politically that's not as important. And you're giving to the college-educated middle class, right? Republicans are already hitting on this. Tom Cotton says, why are we taking money from truck drivers to pay the student loans of rich lawyers, right? Ron DeSantis is saying, similar things. Why are we taking from workers to pay for the women's studies degrees of different people, right? So that's already radioactive. There's no way Democrats in Congress want to vote for this, right? Because right now, if they live in districts where it's not beneficial, they can stand up and say, well, we don't support the Biden administration doing this. And it doesn't really cost them anything because they're not having to buck their party on it because they don't have to take a vote. But if they don't do that, then Biden is going to have to make cuts. Again, if you can't appropriate money for something, you've got to make cuts. You've got to move money around. Okay? And that means probably cuts from the Department of Education. So depending on the mechanism they get to pay for this, that makes a huge difference, and I'll tell you why. It's probably not constitutional, what Biden has done. Okay? I say this not to be out on a limb here, but because his own Department of Education said, we don't think we constitutionally have the authority to do this. The Speaker of the House, who is of his party, Nancy Pelosi, said, we don't think Biden doesn't have the authority to do this. He can defer, but he can't forgive. Okay. By the way, there's another deferral in this as well. We're not talking about that as much because it doesn't raise as many of these issues, although it's not a great policy either. But because of that, you then have a question of who can sue, who has standing. And that's a complicated issue. To show standing in this issue, and an issue like this, you would have to show that you're materially harmed by this policy. And courts in the past have not been very permissive of taxpayers saying that new government spending causes material harm to them. However, if they are in fact going into the Department of Education and taking money from somewhere, because if they're not going to go the congressional appropriation route, they have to do this by taking money from somewhere else or something else, right? Then that person would potentially have standing to say, hey, this materially harms me because we were supposed to get this money and we didn't. Now, if they try to pay for it out of unspent COVID funds, which is a possibility, let's say you were a school in Alabama or Texas or something like that, you were promised you were going to get some COVID funds, you didn't, right? That school district, in theory, would have standing, I think. And I've talked to a lawyer about this, and he said that I'm not crazy, right? Now, I'm not a lawyer, I don't play one on TV, but it seems to me like that's the type of situation where someone would have a claim that they are materially harmed by this. So if you can find someone who has standing, I expect this will be enjoined. An injunction means it can't take effect until the court decides. And I think this one's going to the Supreme Court. And it's hard to see how you can find in the emanations and penumbras of the Constitution the right for the president to initiate a major financial policy like this. Okay? Money is Congress's job. It says so right in the Constitution. The president can decide how that money gets spent within certain parameters. But just saying we're going to forgive a bunch of people's debts doesn't sound like something the president has the constitutional authority to do so. And I mean, I don't think I'm out on a limb here since I'm just restating something Nancy Pelosi said. So it'll be interesting to see how this all plays out in that sense. I would expect this will be a legal fight. Now, I want to discuss, as we kind of close on this, a few more implications of this that are maybe a little bit more political. First of all, I think this demonstrates beyond a shadow of a doubt that Democrats perceive the college-educated, wealthy suburbanite as their new base. Okay? Why? Because if you were primarily trying to help lower income borrowers, you wouldn't have an income threshold this high. You wouldn't have an income threshold that's $250,000 per couple. Okay, you wouldn't have an income threshold that Elizabeth Warren thinks is rich people whenever she's trying to figure out how high taxes should be on the rich. Okay, you are essentially trying to bribe that constituency to come out and vote in the midterms. And that indicates that Democrats believe this constituency is their base. I've spoken previously on the audio version of my podcast about how we're in the process of a realignment. The Republicans are becoming a more sort of working class oriented party, multi-ethnic working class party. Democrats are becoming a more wealthy, college educated party. That trend was starting before Trump, has accelerated in the wake of Trump. And this is just more evidence of sort of that direction. Okay, so that's one aspect. Two, if you were trying to do something that would drive the Republican base to the polls en masse, you have succeeded. Okay, if you were trying to unite the more populist and the more fiscally conservative wings of the party, of the Republican Party, this is the perfect way to do it, because fiscal conservatives are like, this is financially irresponsible. It's adding to the debt. People should pay their obligations back. I mean, that's like the base of fiscal conservatism, insofar as there actually is a constituency for, you know, that type of eat your vegetables, fiscal conservative, fiscal responsibility. Like, those people are enraged about this. If you want to see evidence of this, read anything that Charlie Cook from National Review has written over the past week. He has been like Captain Ahab, and this is his white whale, and he's going after it hammer and tong, and it's amazing, and I highly recommend you read it. Just look up anything he's written, right? So that's the fiscal conservative. From the more populist perspective, right, this is Main Street. Main Street is getting screwed over to benefit Wall Street, or in this case, Cambridge, right, the ivory tower. Right? You're taking from the truckers and you're giving to the academics. It's the perfect encapsulation of populism, right? Of you are sticking it to the common man and giving to the, you're robbing from the common man and giving to the elites. I mean, that's the way this is going to play, right? So look, these two groups don't agree about a lot of things. They don't often like each other. The Chamber of Commerce and the MAGA folks aren't hanging out, you know, sipping tea together, right? They haven't been doing that since the Tea Party, pun intended. But on the other hand, you give them an issue that can unite them, that they can all agree this is BS. And all of a sudden, some of those divisions are going to go away, right? Some of those divisions will at least be forgotten. So Biden is playing with fire here. There are reports coming out that even some folks in his administration know that this has the potential to be a huge disaster. And so, you know, we'll have to see how this plays out. But if there's anything that could trigger something like the Tea Party movement in 2009, right, it's this. The question for Republicans and conservatives is, will it happen in time? The timing on this, if you're a Democrat, is diabolical, because this is happening right before Labor Day. And Labor Day is right when people really start paying attention to elections. And this is going to be the story that's fresh on their minds. All right. So if you're Democrats, you're banking on this. You're banking on the fact that the MAGA folks aren't going to come out, and that you can drive out college turnout. And this is going to be enough to save you and inoculate you from that midterm. And if you're a Republican, if you're on the conservative side, you are banking on the fact that we now have a wedge issue that can actually unite our base against this thing that's going on, and that we can actually use it to drive people to the polls. So in a couple of months, we'll see who's right. Long term, though, this is a really bad policy. It sets a bad precedent. It's probably actually going to harm higher ed more than it helps. And, you know, while it will help a narrow subset of borrowers, I think in the long run, even they will probably look back and say, was it worth it? And I suspect the answer to that's probably no. All right, that's going to be a wrap for this episode. Please remember, you can rate and subscribe on your favorite podcast provider, but we especially hope that you will check us out on American and the number one, where you have a huge amount of really good video content coming out. And so we look forward to our continued partnership with them, and thank them for letting us use their studio to record this episode today. So, for Blind Politics, this is Dr. Nolte, signing off.